Long before satellites circled the Earth, before GPS could whisper directions in our ears, the world was a vast, mysterious place, and the only way to make sense of it was through the art of maps. But these weren't just any maps. They were hand-drawn masterpieces, filled with swirling seas, towering mountains, and creatures that defied imagination. Some were so accurate they still leave modern scientists scratching their heads, while others were woven with myths and legends, reflecting the hopes and fears of the people who created them. What if I told you that these ancient maps hold secrets, lost knowledge, forgotten civilizations, and clues about how our ancestors saw their place in the cosmos? Picture this, a medieval map where dragons lurk at the edges of the known world, or an ancient chart that somehow depicts Antarctica centuries before it was officially discovered. These weren't mistakes or wild guesses. They were deliberate, crafted by skilled hands and curious minds trying to make sense of a planet that was still largely unexplored. The Piri Reis Map, drawn in the early 1500s, shows coastlines with eerie precision, so precise that some argue it hints at knowledge we've since forgotten. How did cartographers, without the benefit of aerial views or satellite imagery, capture such detail? And what can these maps teach us about the civilizations that made them? This is more than a story of ink and parchment. It's a journey into the human spirit, our relentless drive to explore, to understand, and to leave our mark on the unknown. From the sprawling Portolan charts of Mediterranean sailors to the intricate celestial maps of ancient China, each artifact is a time capsule, revealing not just geography, but the dreams and fears of those who dared to map the unimaginable. So let's set sail together back through the centuries to uncover what these ancient maps truly revealed about the world long before satellites ever gazed down upon it. The secrets they hold might just change how you see history and our place within it. The earliest maps weren't just tools, they were acts of imagination, born from the human need to make sense of an overwhelming world. Picture Babylonian scholars pressing cuneiform into wet clay, sketching a world they believed floated like a disk on endless waters. These weren't mere drawings, they were cosmology in clay, blending geography with myth. Meanwhile, along the Nile, Egyptian surveyors mapped fields with astonishing precision, using knotted ropes to measure plots after annual floods. Their maps were practical, even bureaucratic, meant to resolve disputes over farmland rather than chart distant lands. But both cultures shared something profound, the urge to translate the chaos of the world into something tangible, something that could be held in the hands. Then came the Greeks, who turned map-making into a science. Think of Eratosthenes, who calculated Earth's circumference with nothing but shadows and geometry, coming within a few hundred miles of the actual figure. Or Ptolemy, whose scrolls introduced grids of latitude and longitude, a system so revolutionary it's still echoed in our digital maps today. Yet even these pioneers couldn't resist weaving legend into their work. The edges of their maps often faded into terra incognita, marked with warnings of sea monsters or the gardens of the gods. It's this duality, rigorous measurement paired with wild speculation, that makes ancient maps so fascinating. They weren't just records of what was known, they were invitations to wonder about what lay beyond. What's truly remarkable is how these early techniques echo through history. The Babylonian circular worldview persisted in medieval Mappa Mundi, while Ptolemy's coordinates guided explorers like Columbus centuries later. Every stroke of ink, every groove in clay, was a step toward understanding our place in the cosmos, a puzzle we're still piecing together today. Claudius Ptolemy didn't just draw a map, He redefined how humanity saw the world. In the 2nd century, when most believed the Earth was flat or that distant lands were realms of myth, his Geographia laid out a vision so precise it would guide explorers for over 1,000 years. Imagine unrolling a scroll in Alexandria's Great Library to find a world divided by a grid of lines latitude and longitude, each carefully calculated to anchor cities, mountains, and seas in their proper place. This wasn't just a map, it was a mathematical masterpiece, a fusion of astronomy, geometry, and sheer audacity. Ptolemy estimated the Earth's circumference at roughly 29,000 miles, only a fraction off the true figure, and plotted lands from the misty coasts of Britannia to the Golden Isles of Southeast Asia. For an era without satellites or even reliable ship logs, this was nothing short of revolutionary. Yet what's most fascinating isn't just the accuracy, it's the legacy. Even Ptolemy's errors shaped history. His calculation of the Earth's size, slightly underestimated, later convinced Columbus that sailing west to Asia was feasible. That miscalculation, ironically, led to the accidental discovery of a continent Ptolemy never knew existed. And while his map omitted the Americas and stretched Asia too far east, its grid system became the backbone of Renaissance cartography. Think of it, a framework scribbled in ink on papyrus, enduring through the Dark Ages, only to resurface in the hands of navigators like Vasco da Gama and Magellan. But Ptolemy's true genius lay in his humility. He knew his map was incomplete, peppering its edges with blank spaces labeled unknown lands. Unlike earlier cartographers who filled voids with monsters, Ptolemy left room for discovery, an open invitation to future generations. In that way, his map wasn't just a snapshot of the ancient world. It was a blueprint for exploration, a testament to the idea that the Earth was vast, measurable, and waiting to be understood. Centuries later, as sailors traced his coordinates across uncharted oceans, they weren't just following lines on parchment. They were stepping into the mind of a scholar who dared to believe the world could be mapped long before technology made it easy. The Hereford Mappa Mundi isn't just a map, it's a window into the medieval soul. Stretching 5 feet tall, this sprawling parchment from the 13th century shows a world where geography and theology collide. Jerusalem sits at the very center, a radiant heart encircled by continents shaped like a clover leaf, not because cartographers misunderstood the Earth's form, but because the number 3 symbolized the Holy Trinity. Biblical scenes unfold along riverbanks, Adam and Eve expelled from Eden, Noah's Ark resting on Mount Ararat, even the Tower of Babel piercing the heavens. And then there are the creature's dog-headed men in Africa, one-footed troglodytes in the east, dragons coiled at the world's edge. To modern eyes, it might seem fanciful, even chaotic. But every ink stroke carried purpose. These maps weren't made to guide travelers across land. They were meant to guide souls toward salvation. Picture a monk tracing his finger along the vellum, retracing the Exodus or Christ's crucifixion as if walking a spiritual pilgrimage. The Hereford Map even includes a chilling warning at its base. This is the end of the world, and beyond lies only fire and ice. Yet amid the symbolism, fragments of reality peek through. Coastal towns dotting the Mediterranean match actual trade routes, while rivers like the Nile twist with surprising accuracy. Even mythical beasts often marked real places. The land of the cannibals might reference explorers' tales of distant tribes distorted through hearsay. What makes these maps so extraordinary is their duality. They reveal how medieval Europeans navigated a paradox, a world both divinely ordered and terrifyingly vast. The same culture that produced the Hereford Map also saw merchants and crusaders bringing back precise Portolan charts of harbors and currents. Faith and fact coexisted, one shaping how they saw eternity, the other how they sailed the seas. In that tension, we glimpse a truth about all maps. They're never just about land. They're mirrors reflecting what their makers feared, worshipped, and longed to understand. And perhaps that's why the Mappa Mundi still captivate us. They remind us that every map, no matter how scientific, carries the fingerprints of its creator's dreams. Even today, as satellites orbit overhead, we still project our hopes onto blank spaces, searching not just for coordinates, but for meaning. The Piri Reis Map doesn't just challenge our understanding of history, it ignites it. Drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this fragment of a larger world map depicts coastlines with a precision that seems impossible for its time. The most startling detail, the lower edge appears to show the northern coastline of Antarctica, a continent buried under miles of ice, undiscovered by European explorers for another 300 years. Even more baffling, the land is rendered without its glacial covering, as if the cartographer had access to knowledge of a time when Antarctica's shores were free of ice, something last seen millions of years before humans walked the earth. How could this be? Piri Reis himself left clues in the map's margins, noting that he compiled it from older sources, some dating back to the 4th century before Christ. Among these were charts from ancient Alexandria's legendary library, along with maps seized from Spanish and Portuguese navigators. But the most tantalizing hint comes from his own writings. He referenced the maps of the ancients, suggesting he was piecing together fragments of long-lost knowledge. Some researchers argue these sources might have included advanced cartographic records from civilizations like the Minoans or Phoenicians, seafaring cultures whose full achievements remain shrouded in mystery. Others, more controversially, speculate about even older, perhaps unknown, maritime powers whose maps survived in fragments. Mainstream scholars offer a different take. They point out that the so-called Antarctica on the Piri Reis map could instead be a distorted version of South America's eastern coast, with artistic liberties taken to fill in gaps. After all, early maps often mashed together hearsay and real geography, turning sailors' tales into landforms. Yet even this explanation doesn't fully account for the map's eerie accuracy in other areas. The outline of South America's bulge is nearly perfect, and the placement of the Atlantic's islands aligns strikingly with modern charts. If it's a mistake, it's an astonishingly lucky one. What's undeniable is the map's power to provoke questions. Could it be evidence of a prehistoric civilization with advanced seafaring technology, their maps passed down through the ages, or does it reflect the ingenious synthesis of scattered navigational logs, pieced together by a brilliant mind like Piri Reis? The truth may lie somewhere in between, a reminder that history's puzzle is far from complete. Every time we scrutinize this faded parchment, we're not just looking at ink and vellum. We're glimpsing the ghostly echoes of knowledge that once was, and wondering how much more might still be waiting to be rediscovered. While medieval European maps were still crowded with sea monsters and biblical allegories, Chinese cartographers were quietly perfecting the science of precision. The Daming Hunyi II, crafted in the 14th century, isn't just a map. It's a triumph of observation and scale, stretching from the Korean peninsula to the edge of Africa with an accuracy that would have left Ptolemy stunned. Rivers snake across the parchment with lifelike curves, mountain ranges rise in delicate brushstrokes, and over 1,000 settlements are meticulously plotted, their names inscribed in elegant calligraphy. This wasn't guesswork. It was the product of a sprawling bureaucracy that employed surveyors, astronomers, and envoys to compile data from every corner of the empire. Imagine teams of scholars triangulating distances with compasses and gnomon shadows, or imperial couriers returning from distant provinces with scrolls of local landmarks, all fused into a single, cohesive vision of the known world. What makes Chinese cartography so groundbreaking isn't just its detail, but its purpose. Unlike European Mappa Mundi designed for spiritual contemplation or Portolan charts meant for sailors, these maps were tools of governance. The Daming Hanyi II was commissioned by the Ming dynasty to administer taxes, deploy troops, and project imperial power. Every road, every tributary, every border was a thread in the fabric of control. Yet within that practicality lay artistry. Look closely, and you'll find subtle gradients of ink depicting elevation, or symbols distinguishing pine forests from bamboo groves, a harmony of form and function unmatched in the West for centuries. And then there's Zheng, the eunuch admiral whose 7 voyages redefined exploration. His treasure fleets, some carrying over 27,000 men, relied on maps so precise they charted monsoons, ocean currents, and star paths. One surviving scroll from his expeditions, the Maukan map, traces his route from Nanjing to the Swahili coast with waypoints so accurate modern historians have retraced them using GPS. These weren't just navigational aids, they were diplomatic passports used to awe foreign rulers with the Ming dynasty's reach. When Zheng presented giraffes from Kenya to the Yongle emperor, it wasn't just a gift, it was proof that the maps worked. The irony is haunting. Just as Zheng's fleets were dismantled and China turned inward, Europe began its age of discovery using crude charts by comparison. Had the Ming sustained their naval ambition, our global history might look radically different. Instead, their maps became relics, hidden in palace archives while Western explorers stumbled toward continents the Chinese had already mapped. Yet their legacy endures, the Daming Hanyi II's grid system, echoing the celestial grids of ancient Chinese astronomers, reminds us that precision cartography wasn't born with satellites. It was painstakingly inked onto silk, one brushstroke at a time. Polynesian navigators didn't need compasses or parchment to conquer the Pacific. They had something far more powerful, the language of the sea itself. Their stick charts, intricate lattices of coconut fiber and bamboo, looked nothing like European maps. Instead of coastlines and cities, these delicate frameworks encoded the ocean's hidden rhythms, the way swells bent around unseen islands, how currents whispered against hulls, even the flight paths of birds at dawn. To hold one was to hold a living atlas, woven from generations of observation passed down through chance and touch. Imagine a navigator tracing his fingers along the sticks, feeling not just wood but the pulse of tides, the memory of countless voyages etched into his hands. What's astonishing isn't just their design, but how they were used. These charts weren't carried on canoes, they were memorized, internalized until the navigator could close his eyes and see the ocean's patterns unfold like a song. A single chart might represent hundreds of miles, with curved twigs marking the refraction of waves around atolls, and shells anchoring the positions of stars. The real map existed in the mind, a mental model refined by years of apprenticeship. Navigators trained from childhood, learning to read the color of clouds, the drift of seaweed, even the taste of the wind. When clouds gathered over an invisible island, they'd notice the way light scattered differently. When currents shifted, they'd taste the salt's subtle change. This wasn't just navigation, it was a dialogue with nature, and it worked. While European ships clung to coastlines, terrified of the open ocean, Polynesians crossed thousands of miles in double-hulled canoes, settling islands from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui. Their voyages weren't accidents. They were deliberate, repeatable feats of wayfinding proven when modern researchers reconstructed these techniques and sailed the Hokulea from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional methods. The stick chart's brilliance lies in their humility. They acknowledge that the sea wasn't just a blank space to be conquered, but a teacher. Each ripple, each star, each gust was a syllable in a story the ocean had been telling long before humans arrived to listen. Yet perhaps the most poignant detail is what these charts didn't show. Unlike European maps cluttered with monsters and myths, Polynesian navigators had no need for fantasy. Their charts contained only what they knew firsthand, verified by countless journeys. In that purity, they achieved something rare, a map that wasn't just a representation of the world, but a testament to human ingenuity's quiet harmony with it. Long before satellites, they'd unlocked the planet's secrets, not by rising above it, but by becoming part of its rhythm. In the bustling court of 12th century Sicily, where Arab scholars debated Greek philosophers and Norman kings dreamed of empire, one man wove the world's knowledge into a single, breathtaking tapestry. Muhammad al-Idrisi, a geographer born in Muslim Spain, spent 15 years crafting the Tabula Rogeriana, a map so revolutionary it would redefine medieval cartography. Picture King Roger Roman II of Sicily, a ruler obsessed with learning, commissioning this masterpiece not as a tool for conquest, but as a monument to human curiosity. The result, a shimmering silver disc 6 feet wide, engraved with 70 detailed sections showing lands from the frosty edges of Scandinavia to the golden deserts of the Sahara. But what made al-Idrisi's work truly groundbreaking wasn't just its scope, it was its perspective. For starters, the Tabula Rogeriana turned the world upside down literally. While modern maps place north at the top, al-Idrisi oriented his with south facing upward, aligning with the conventions of Arab astronomers who studied the heavens from Egypt. This wasn't a whimsical choice, it reflected a sophisticated understanding of celestial navigation, where the sun's path and star patterns guided travelers. The map also corrected centuries of errors inherited from Ptolemy, like the overextension of Africa or the misplacement of the Indian Ocean. Al-Idrisi didn't rely on hearsay. He interviewed merchants, cross-referenced travelers' diaries, and even sent envoys to verify distances. His notes describe the Nile's sources with startling accuracy, centuries before European explorers reached them, and depict the fjords of Norway with a precision that suggests first-hand accounts from Viking traders. Yet the map's brilliance lies in its synthesis. Al-Idrisi merged the rigorous mathematics of Greek geography with the rich descriptive traditions of Arab explorers, adding layers of cultural insight. His texts accompany each region like a medieval travel guide, Sicily's volcanic soils perfect for vineyards, the bustling markets of Constantinople, even the eerie glow of Arctic winters where the sun barely sets. For Roger Roman II, this wasn't just a map, it was an encyclopedia of the known world, a bridge between civilizations, and its legacy endured. When Columbus set sail, he carried maps influenced by al-Idrisi's work. When Ottoman admirals charted the Mediterranean, they referenced copies of the Tabula Rogeriana. What's most poignant, though, is how this masterpiece transcends its era. In a time often painted as a clash of faiths, al-Idrisi's collaboration with a Christian king produced something timeless, a reminder that curiosity knows no borders. The map's silver surface, now lost to history, once reflected not just continents but the best of human endeavor, the hunger to see farther, to question deeper, to redraw the boundaries of the possible. And in that, it remains as vital today as it was under the Sicilian sun 8 centuries ago. The Vineland Map is either one of history's most explosive discoveries or its most elaborate hoax. Unearthed in 1957, this yellowed parchment depicts the northeastern Atlantic with eerie precision, including a landmass labeled Vineland west of Greenland. If genuine, it's the oldest known map showing any part of the Americas, predating Columbus by nearly 500 years and corroborating Viking sagas that tell of Leif Erikson's voyages to a land of wild grapes around the year 1000. The implications are staggering, proof that medieval Norse explorers not only reached North America but mapped it, possibly sharing that knowledge across Europe. Yet from the moment it surfaced, the map has been shadowed by doubt. Scientific scrutiny has fueled the fire. In 2018, researchers analyzing the map's ink found traces of titanium dioxide, a compound common in 20th century pigments but unheard of in medieval inks. The parchment itself, while dated to the 1400s through carbon testing, shows signs of artificial aging. Even the Latin inscription raises eyebrows. Phrases like Vineland, Island of Grapes, mirror 20th century interpretations of Viking texts rather than medieval phrasing. Skeptics argue it's a masterful fake, crafted to capitalize on mid-century fascination with Viking lore. But here's the twist: the map's geographic details align uncannily with Norse sagas. The depiction of Greenland's coastline, for instance, matches reality in ways no forger could have known in the 1950s, when much of the island remained uncharted. What makes the Vineland map so compelling isn't just its potential authenticity, it's the questions it forces us to confront. If it's real, why does it stand alone? Where are the other copies, the corroborating charts that should have circulated among European courts? If it's fake, why include such obscure, verifiable details? The map's defenders suggest it might be a 15th century copy of a lost Viking original, explaining both its accuracy and anachronisms. Others propose it was a speculative piece, blending Norse oral tradition with the era's growing geographic curiosity. Beyond the debate lies a deeper truth. The Vineland map, real or forged, reflects humanity's hunger to rewrite narratives. It challenges the Eurocentric myth of Columbus as the sole discoverer of America, reminding us that history is rarely linear. Even if the parchment itself is a fabrication, it points to a reality we now know from archaeology. Vikings did build temporary settlements in Newfoundland, at Elant's Ox Meadows. Their sagas weren't just legends. The map's power, then, isn't just in its ink, but in the way it holds up a mirror to our own biases, forcing us to ask how much of history remains hidden, waiting to be rediscovered or convincingly imagined. Portolan charts weren't just maps. They were lifelines, inked onto animal skins with a precision that still astonishes historians. Imagine a 13th century Zeno sailor unrolling the Carta Pisana, its surface alive with a spiderweb of room lines radiating from compass roses like sunburst. These weren't decorative. Each line marked a constant bearing, a path to follow no matter the winds or currents. Sailors would trace them with calloused fingers, navigating from port to port by aligning the chart with their compass, turning the Mediterranean's chaotic waters into a grid of calculated routes. What's staggering is how accurate these charts were. The Carta Pisana, drawn around 1275, captures the jagged coastline of Corsica or the curve of Tunisia's shore with near-modern fidelity, all without the benefit of sextants or chronometers. But the real genius of Portolan charts lay in their pragmatism. Unlike Mappa Mundi, crowded with allegory, these maps stripped away everything unnecessary. No sea monsters, no biblical scenes, just coastlines peppered with names written perpendicular to the shore, so they'd never obstruct the view of a harbor's approach. The colors told their own story: black for prominent landmarks, red for crucial ports, blue for treacherous shoals. Mariners didn't need to read Latin to understand them. The visuals spoke a universal language. And they were collaborative. Each chart grew richer with use, as sailors added notes in margins, warnings of sudden squalls, hidden reefs, or coves where freshwater could be found. These weren't static documents, they were living records evolving with every voyage. Their value was incalculable. Venetian merchants hoarded them like gold, knowing control of these charts meant dominance over trade routes. Some were even coded deliberate distortions inserted to mislead rival nations. Lose a Portolan to pirates, and you might lose your competitive edge for decades. Yet for all their secrecy, their legacy was democratizing. By standardizing navigation, they shrank the Mediterranean, turning what was once a labyrinth of guesswork into a highway of predictable commerce. The same room lines that guided Pepper's ships from Alexandria to Marseille later inspired the grid systems of modern maps. In that way, these medieval masterpieces didn't just chart coasts, they charted the future of exploration itself. And perhaps that's their most enduring lesson. The Portolan tradition reminds us that innovation isn't always about invention. Sometimes it's about refinement, taking the chaos of the world and giving it order, one deliberate line at a time. Long before GPS, these sailors understood that the difference between lost and found wasn't just skill, but the right map in steady hands. The Fra Mauro map doesn't just sit at the crossroads of history, it embodies the moment when the medieval mind began to reach beyond its limits. Picture Venice in 1450, a city humming with merchants from Alexandria, diplomats from Constantinople, and explorers whispering tales of distant lands. In a monastery on the island of Murano, Fra Mauro, a Camaldolese monk, was stitching these fragments of knowledge into a map that would defy convention. His masterpiece, a 6-foot-wide disc of vellum and ink, was unlike anything Europe had seen. For the first time, Africa wasn't drawn as a cramped, impassable landmass ending in burning sands. It stretched southward, wrapped by ocean, hinting at a sea route to India decades before Vasco da Gama proved it possible. What makes this map extraordinary isn't just its geography, but its sources. Fra Mauro openly dismissed the authority of Ptolemy, whose work had been gospel for 1,000 years. Instead, he filled his margins with notes like, "I have spoken with those who saw these places with their own eyes." Arab traders, Ethiopian pilgrims, even survivors of Mongol caravans, their collective wisdom became his compass. Marco Polo's descriptions of Java's spices found their way onto the parchment, alongside accounts of Chinese junks so vast they made Venetian galleys look like fishing boats. Yet the map's genius lies in its balance. Fra Mauro didn't erase the old world to embrace the new, he let them coexist. The Garden of Eden still appears in the east, but it's tucked discreetly behind the sprawling realism of the Indian Ocean trade routes. Critically, this was a map meant to be used, not just admired. Ships navigating the Red Sea could trace its jagged inlets with practical accuracy, while gold mining regions of West Africa were marked with economic precision. Even the errors reveal progress. Japan, misplaced far south of its true location, reflects the limitations of sailors' logs, yet its inclusion at all shows how far cartography had leaped from the days of Phantom Islands and edge-of-the-world monsters. The legacy of Fra Mauro's work is subtle but profound. Within a generation of its completion, Columbus would study similar maps before sailing west, and Portuguese navigators would carry its vision around the Cape of Good Hope. In that way, the map wasn't just a snapshot of its time, it was a catalyst proving that the world was wider, stranger, and more navigable than anyone had dared to dream. And perhaps that's its greatest lesson. Sometimes the boldest leaps forward begin not with discarding the past, but by weaving its threads into something new. Ancient star maps weren't just guides, they were living stories, woven into the very fabric of human survival. The Dunhuang Star Atlas, painted on paper in the 7th century and hidden for centuries in a sealed cave along the Silk Road, is more than a scientific artifact. It's a testament to the meticulous patience of Tang Dynasty astronomers, who plotted 1,300 stars across 28 lunar mansions with brushstrokes so precise. Modern researchers can still identify constellations like the Big Dipper and Orion. But what's truly striking is how these celestial patterns serve dual purposes. The same stars that guided caravans through the Gobi Desert's shifting sands also dictated imperial rituals, harvest cycles, and even the timing of wars. To hold this atlas was to hold the rhythm of an empire, a fusion of science and spirituality etched in ink. Half a world away, Polynesian navigators were crafting their own celestial maps, not on parchment, but in memory. Without written language, they transformed the night sky into a mental compass, memorizing the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars like a sailor's alphabet. Each star was a waypoint. Hokupa, the North Star, anchored their bearings, while the curve of Scorpius' tail pointed toward Tahiti, but their genius lay in layering multiple cues. A navigator wouldn't just follow one star. He'd track how the entire sky rotated overhead, feeling the swell of waves beneath his canoe's shift as unseen islands disrupted ocean currents. The stars were just one thread in a tapestry that included cloud formations, bird migrations, and even the phosphorescent glow of deep-sea creatures, a holistic navigation system so refined. It allowed them to traverse 2,000 miles of open Pacific with no instruments but their senses. These celestial traditions reveal a profound truth about ancient maps. They were never just tools, they were dialogues between earth and sky, blending observation with mythology. The Babylonians saw constellations as gods walking among them. The Maori traced their ancestry back to specific stars, and medieval Arab astronomers calibrated their astrolabes to align with verses from the Quran. Even errors carried meaning. Some star maps placed Mars or Venus in implausible positions, not because astronomers were careless, but because planetary movements were believed to carry omens, warping accuracy in favor of prophecy. Today, as we peer at digitized versions of the Dunhuang Atlas or watch Polynesian wayfinders relearn ancestral star paths, we're reminded that these maps weren't just about reaching a destination. They were about understanding humanity's place in a vast, interconnected cosmos. The same stars that guided a Tang scholar's brush now guide satellites, but the wonder remains. Whether painted on cave walls or coded into algorithms, the urge to map the heavens is, at its core, the urge to find our way home. The Zeno map is a riddle wrapped in vellum and ink, a 16th century chart that dares us to question everything we know about the North Atlantic. At first glance, it seems ordinary enough. Coastlines sketched in faded brown ink, Latin names curling across the parchment. But look closer and the anomalies leap out. A sprawling island labeled Friesland dominates the sea between Iceland and the British Isles, though no such landmass exists. Nearby, Estatiland and Drogeo float in the Western Ocean, names plucked from nowhere yet drawn with the confidence of first-hand knowledge. The map's creators, Venetian nobles Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, claimed it was based on their ancestors' voyages in the late 1300s, journeys that allegedly took them farther north than any European had sailed before. But was this a genuine record of lost lands or an elaborate lie? The evidence cuts both ways. Skeptics point to Friesland's suspicious resemblance to the Faroe Islands, just inflated to twice their size. Estatiland's description, a place where people spoke a Latin-like language and brewed beer, echoes tall tales spun by medieval travelers. Worse, the original Zeno letters describing these voyages vanished, leaving only a published version from 1558, riddled with anachronisms. Critics argue the whole affair was a clever forgery by a descendant, Niccolo Zeno the Younger, to burnish his family's legacy during Venice's golden age of exploration. Yet there are whispers even a hoax couldn't explain. The map's depiction of Greenland, though distorted, matches Norse settlements known only to a handful of 14th-century sailors. The Phantom Islands align eerily with areas where the seafloor rises abruptly, suggesting they could be echoes of real places now submerged by rising waters after the last ice age. Perhaps the most tantalizing theory ties the map to the lost Norse colonies. The Zenos wrote of meeting fishermen who spoke of a land called Engroenland, Greenland, and a distant western territory. Could these be garbled accounts of Viking voyages to North America, passed down through generations? The map's inclusion of Icaria, an island named after the mythical Icarus, hints at deeper layers. In Norse sagas, Greenland's icy wastes were sometimes called the place where the sun melted Icarus' wings, blending classical myth with northern lore. What makes the Zeno map so endlessly captivating isn't just the question of its authenticity, it's the way it mirrors the chaos of its era. This was a time when maps were equal parts science and storytelling, when every unexplored coastline might hide dragons or empires. The Zenos, whether frauds or faithful chroniclers, tapped into that hunger for the unknown. Their map forces us to confront how much of history is built on fragments and faith, on half-remembered tales that slip between truth and legend. And so it remains, suspended between deception and discovery, challenging us to wonder, if even one of its mysteries is real, what else might we have missed? While Europe's medieval maps still place Jerusalem at the center of the world, Korea's Honil-gangni Yokdi Gukdo Jai-do was quietly revolutionizing cartography with a vision far ahead of its time. Created in 1402 by royal astronomers under King Taejong, this sprawling silk map stretched over 6 feet tall, depicting lands from Japan's jagged shores to Africa's Horn with startling precision. But what made it extraordinary wasn't just its accuracy, it was the sheer breadth of its sources. Chinese star charts, Arab merchant logs, even fragments of European missionary accounts, all were woven together into a single cohesive tapestry of the known world. Here was a map that didn't just reflect Korea's perspective, but served as a meeting point for civilizations separated by thousands of miles. The level of detail still stuns historians. The Arabian Peninsula's distinctive boot shape curves faithfully along the Red Sea, while the Ganges River snakes through the Indian subcontinent with near-modern accuracy. Trade routes thread across the parchment like veins, marking paths where silk, spices, and ideas flowed between empires. Some scholars argue the map's depiction of Africa's southern tip, drawn decades before Portuguese explorers rounded the Cape of Good Hope, hints at knowledge passed along ancient maritime networks we've yet to fully uncover. Yet the real innovation lies in its grid system, a meticulous coordinate framework adapted from Chinese celestial maps but refined to ground geography in mathematical certainty. This wasn't guesswork, it was science, calculated through astronomical observations and cross-checked against travel records from diplomats and sailors. What's often overlooked is how the map functioned as a political statement. In an era when Korea's Joseon dynasty sought to assert itself as a center of learning, the Honil-gangni Yokdi Gukdo Jai-do showcased the kingdom's ability to synthesize global knowledge. The very act of compiling Arab and European data alongside Chinese traditions sent a message. Korea was no peripheral player, but a hub in its own right. The map's name, translating to Map of Integrated Lands and Regions of Historical Countries and Capitals, reveals this ambition. It wasn't just a tool for navigation, but a declaration of interconnectedness. Yet for all its sophistication, the map also held mysteries. Some regions, like the distant West, fade into stylized representations of walled cities and mythical mountains, reminders that even the most advanced cartographers filled gaps with imagination. And tragically, the original was lost to time, surviving only through later copies. But its legacy endures, challenging the Eurocentric narrative that credits only Western explorers with discovering the world. Long before Mercator, Korean scholars were piecing together a planet far more connected than we often imagine, proof that the urge to map isn't just about territory, but about seeing ourselves as part of something vast. The Bewatch Map doesn't just blur the line between speculation and science, it tears through it. Created in 1737 by French cartographer Philippe Bewatch, this controversial chart depicts a landmass eerily resembling Antarctica, decades before Captain Cook's southern voyages and over a century before the frozen continent was officially sighted. But here's the twist: Bewatch's Antarctica isn't covered in ice. Instead, it's split by a narrow sea dividing the land into two vast lobes, a feature modern sonar mapping confirmed only in the 1950s, when we discovered the transantarctic mountains actually separate the continent into distinct geological regions beneath the ice. How could an 18th century scholar, working without satellites or sonar, possibly have known this? The answer might lie in Bewatch's sources. He claimed his map synthesized accounts from ancient seafarers, including Phoenician and Greek texts lost to time. Some researchers point to the Piri Reis Map's similar anomalies as evidence of a shared, forgotten knowledge base, perhaps maritime records preserved from Alexandria's legendary library or even earlier civilizations. Skeptics counter that Bewatch simply made an educated guess, extrapolating from contemporary theories about land masses balancing the northern continents. After all, the map also includes phantom islands and misplaced coastlines typical of its era. Yet the precision of that central channel is hard to dismiss. It aligns almost perfectly with the underwater topography between East and West Antarctica, a detail no theoretical symmetry could explain. What makes the debate so compelling is what it reveals about how knowledge travels and vanishes. If Bewatch did access ancient sources, they likely originated with seafarers who sailed southern waters when Antarctica's coasts were less glaciated, possibly during warmer periods in antiquity. Portuguese and Arab traders occasionally referenced a great southern land in medieval texts, while Maori oral traditions speak of a frozen realm their ancestors called Te Tipanga Ati Roko. These scattered hints suggest Antarctica may have been glimpsed, if not fully explored, long before modern expeditions. Ultimately, the Bewatch Map forces us to confront how much history remains unwritten. Whether it's proof of prehistoric exploration or simply a lucky cartographic hunch, it reminds us that every age believes it's the first to truly see the world, only to discover again and again that others were there before. To the Lenape people of North America, a map wasn't just lines on bark or hide. It was a living conversation. Their territorial markers, etched into trees or woven into wampum belts, told stories of relationships, which clans could hunt in which valleys, where rivers held ceremonial significance, how alliances stretched between villages. These weren't static boundaries but fluid agreements, as changeable as the seasons. A single map might show a deer crossing not as a geographical feature, but as a sacred gift from the animal spirits, its path marked by knots in a quipu or beads on a belt. This wasn't cartography as Europeans understood it. It was a language of reciprocity, where land wasn't owned but borrowed, and every hill or stream carried the weight of memory. The Inca took this idea even further. Their quipus complex knotted cords functioned as three-dimensional maps, recording distances between settlements, harvest yields, and even the movements of stars. But the true brilliance lay in their adaptability. A quipu could be untied and reknotted as territories shifted, as if the map itself was alive, growing with the empire it described. Spanish chroniclers wrote of Inca runners carrying these cords across mountain passes, their knots encoding not just space but time, when to plant, when to celebrate, when to go to war. To hold a quipu was to hold the rhythm of an entire civilization. Contrast this with European maps of the same era, where land was carved into rigid parcels, bought and sold like cloth. Indigenous cartography operated on a different axis entirely. The Lakota's winter counts painted on buffalo hides wove geography with history, a comet sighting here, a battle there, all anchored to specific landscapes. A Maori Whakapapa map might trace a family's lineage back to a mountain or bay, binding identity to place in ways no deed could capture. These maps didn't just describe territory, they encoded ethics, reminding people that rivers were ancestors, forests were teachers, and every path was a thread in a larger story. What's haunting is how few of these maps survive. Many were destroyed as colonial powers imposed their own grids, their straight lines cutting across indigenous knowledge like a knife. But fragments endure. A Cherokee stickball field's boundaries marked by ancient trees, a Navajo sand painting, its swirling colors mapping the journey of the gods. Even without parchment or ink, these traditions whisper a radical idea, that a map isn't just a tool for navigation, but a covenant, a promise to listen to the land as much as we claim to master it. In that way, they challenge not just how we chart the world, but how we live in it. The Cantino Planisphere wasn't just a map, it was a heist, a masterpiece of espionage that redrew the world in ink and intrigue. Picture the bustling port of Lisbon in 1502, where Portuguese caravels unloaded spices from India and whispers of a new continent called Brazil swirled through the docks. Among the crowds, an unassuming Italian agent named Alberto Cantino moved with purpose. His mission, to smuggle Portugal's most guarded secret, their latest world map, straight into the hands of his patron, the Duke of Ferrara. What he carried away wasn't just parchment, it was power, a snapshot of Europe's widening horizons stolen in broad daylight. What made this map so valuable was its unprecedented detail. The Cantino Planisphere didn't just sketch coastlines, it revealed the true shape of Africa, tracing its southern tip with a precision that shattered ancient myths about impassable oceans. Brazil, freshly claimed by Portugal, sprawled lush and green in the west, its contours drawn from the logs of Pedro Álvares Cabral's accidental landing 2 years prior. For the first time, the Atlantic wasn't a void but a highway, linking continents in a way that hinted at empires yet to come. The map's accuracy was no accident. Portuguese navigators had spent decades refining their craft, using astrolabes to measure latitudes and interviewing pilots who'd braved the roaring 40s. Every curve of the Congo River, every bay along India's Malabar coast, was a trade secret literally worth its weight in gold. Yet the Planisphere's true drama lies in its shadows. To create it, cartographers relied on information guarded under penalty of death. Portugal's Casa da India controlled all maps, forbidding their export to keep rivals like Spain and Venice in the dark. Cantino's success bribing a royal clerk or perhaps a disgruntled sailor exposed just how high the stakes were. Within months, copies of his stolen map circulated among Italian bankers and Habsburg strategists, each one a blueprint for challengers to Portugal's monopoly. The line between cartographer and spy had blurred. Ink became as potent as gunpowder in the race for global dominance. What's often overlooked is how the map's beauty masked its ruthlessness. Gilded with celestial charts and adorned with wind roses, it looked like art, but its subtext was pure realpolitik. Tiny flags planted along Africa's coast marked Portuguese forts, while blank stretches beyond Brazil whispered of lands still unclaimed. This wasn't just navigation, it was a declaration, a visual manifesto of the doctrine of discovery that would justify centuries of colonization. Even its errors were strategic. Some scholars argue the map deliberately distorted certain coastlines, a form of disinformation to mislead competitors. The Cantino Planisphere's legacy is a paradox. It's both a triumph of human curiosity and a relic of cutthroat ambition. Today, as we study its faded pigments in a Modena library, we're not just seeing geography. We're witnessing the moment the world shrank, not from exploration alone, but from the cunning and greed that turned maps into weapons. And in that tension between knowledge and power, between sharing and stealing, lies a question that still haunts us: who gets to draw the lines on our collective future? Some maps don't just show the world as it is, they preserve echoes of worlds long vanished. Take Doggerland, a sprawling stretch of plains and forests that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Today, it lies beneath the churning waves of the North Sea, but medieval maps tell a different story. Faded ink traces river deltas and hills where fishermen now trawl for cod, their nets occasionally snagging on the bones of mammoths or the tools of Mesolithic hunters who wandered these drowned valleys 8,000 years ago. These maps weren't drawn to document climate change. They were practical guides for coastal traders navigating a landscape already slipping beneath the water. Yet now they serve as accidental time capsules, capturing a moment when rising seas were rewriting human geography. The clues aren't limited to Europe. In the Indian Ocean, ancient Tamil charts speak of Kumari Kandam, a fabled landmass said to have connected Sri Lanka to Antarctica. While the legend is shrouded in myth, geological surveys reveal submerged continental shelves matching the description's hints of a time when lower sea levels exposed vast corridors of land. Similarly, Aboriginal songlines passed down for generations describe walking routes to islands now separated by miles of ocean, their details so precise they align with bathymetric maps showing where the continental shelf once lay above water. These aren't mere stories, they're oral maps encoding memories of a planet in flux. What's startling is how abruptly some of these changes occurred. Core samples from the North Sea floor show Doggerland didn't drown gradually. It was swallowed by catastrophic floods, possibly triggered by undersea landslides or glacial meltwater pulses. Maps from the era, like the 13th century Cotton World Map, depict Britain oddly elongated, as if cartographers were stitching together older accounts of a coastline that had fractured. Even the Vikings left hints. Their sagas mention sunken fields near Greenland, places they'd farmed a generation earlier before the permafrost thawed and the ground turned to bog. These artifacts force us to confront a humbling truth. The Earth's face has always been mutable, its borders redrawn by ice and ocean. The difference today is the speed of change and the fact we have the maps to measure it. When we compare satellite images of vanishing Arctic coastlines to medieval portolans marking long-lost islands, we're not just studying history, we're holding up a mirror to our own precarious moment, asking what future cartographers might draw when the ink of our era is finally dry. The Greeks told stories of Hyperborea, a land of eternal sunlight beyond the icy grip of Boreas, the north wind. It appeared in the writings of Herodotus and the lost geographies of Hecataeus, described as a paradise where giants lived for 1,000 years and Apollo himself visited in a chariot drawn by swans. To dismiss this as pure myth would be easy, but what if these tales held whispers of something real? Ancient maps, like Ptolemy's later reconstructions, placed Hyperborea in the distant Arctic, sometimes as an island, other times as a continent. The descriptions are vague yet oddly specific. a place where the sun never set, where amber washed ashore in great quantities, where the air itself seemed to shimmer. Now consider this: modern archaeology has uncovered traces of ancient Arctic cultures that thrived in conditions we'd consider uninhabitable. The Dorset people, who vanished around 1,000 years ago, built stone structures so precise they aligned with solstices. Even earlier, the Scythians' nomads Herodotus wrote about traded gold and furs along routes stretching deep into Siberia. Could fragments of these real societies have bled into Greek traders' tales, morphing into the legend of Hyperborea? Some researchers point to the Sami of Scandinavia, whose shamanic traditions speak of a primordial homeland in the far north, a place of perpetual light. Others note that during the Bronze Age, the Arctic was warmer, its coasts possibly home to settlements now swallowed by rising seas. Then there's the unsettling precision of certain details. Greek texts describe Hyperborean temples built in circular patterns, a design eerily similar to the stone labyrinths found on Russia's Solovetsky Islands, far north of where classical scholars believed the Greeks could have traveled. Even the name itself hints at hidden knowledge. Hyperborea translates to beyond the north wind, but in ancient cosmology, the north was the realm of the unknown, the sacred. To place a utopia there wasn't just whimsy, it was a challenge to the limits of the known world. Of course, skeptics argue Hyperborea was always allegory, a metaphor for the unattainable, like Atlantis or the Garden of the Hesperides. But here's the twist: medieval Arab geographers working from Greek sources drew maps showing a landmass at the pole they called Arin, lush and temperate, surrounded by a circular mountain range. Sound familiar? It's the same description later European explorers would use when they fantasized about an open polar sea. Coincidence? Or could these recurring motifs suggest a kernel of truth, a distorted memory of a time when the Arctic wasn't just a wasteland, but a crossroads? The mystery deepens when you examine the maps themselves. A 15th century globe by Martin Behaim places Hyperborea as a vast territory north of Russia, labeled with cryptic notes about pygmies and gold guarding griffins. These weren't random doodles, they were attempts to reconcile classical lore with the scraps of new geographic data trickling in from Viking traders and Mongol envoys. Even in the Renaissance, when cartographers prided themselves on accuracy, Hyperborea lingered in the margins not as a joke, but as a placeholder for the inexplicable. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in what isn't there. Greek historians wrote that Hyperboreans sent offerings to Delphi wrapped in wheat straw, a ritual that mystified scholars until archaeologists found evidence of Bronze Age trade networks moving amber and metals across Europe, often bundled in straw for protection. Were these offerings tributes or proof that the myth of Hyperborea was really a half-remembered trade route, a connection between the Mediterranean and the Arctic that faded when climates shifted or empires fell? The truth may never be fully uncovered, but the persistence of Hyperborea in maps and texts across millennia suggests something profound, that myths aren't just stories. They're puzzles pieced together from fragments of reality, warped by time but never quite erased. Whether Hyperborea was a real place, a cultural memory, or simply a beautiful lie, its ghost lingers in the blank spaces of our maps, reminding us that every legend might hold a grain of truth waiting to be rediscovered. Arabic astrolabes weren't just tools, they were handheld universes, miniature masterpieces where science and art converged in brass and silver. Picture a 10th century scholar in Baghdad, turning the delicate rete of an astrolabe to align with the night sky, its pierced metalwork casting star-shaped shadows across engraved latitude lines. Each curve and inscription served a purpose. The spiderweb of pointers marked key stars, The concentric circles traced celestial paths, and the backplate's intricate engravings often doubled as tiny regional maps. This wasn't just navigation, it was philosophy made tangible, a physical manifestation of the Islamic Golden Age's core belief that understanding the heavens was inseparable from understanding the earth. What set these devices apart was their astonishing versatility. With a skilled hand, an astrolabe could tell time by the sun or stars, calculate prayer times for any location, even determine the Qibla direction toward Mecca. The best models, like those crafted by the legendary al-Biruni, incorporated geographical data so precise they functioned as portable gazetteers. His astrolabe for Ghazni included not just star positions but altitude corrections for nearby mountain passes, a feature that would have guided caravans through the Hindu Kush with celestial accuracy. The engravings themselves were works of art, often inlaid with silver or gold, their Kufic script quoting Quranic verses about the harmony of creation. But the true genius lay in their adaptability. Unlike rigid European maps, astrolabes were modular. Swapping out plates allowed a traveler to adjust for different latitudes, making them indispensable for merchants crossing from Cordoba to Samarkand. Some surviving examples even bear scratched annotations in multiple languages: Persian, Hebrew, Latin, evidence of how knowledge transcended borders. The famed Carolingian astrolabe, now in the Louvre, shows Norse runes alongside Arabic numerals, likely modified by Viking traders who acquired it in Byzantium. This fluidity made them the smartphones of their day, customizable, multifunctional, and capable of holding entire libraries of data in the palm of one's hand. Their legacy reshaped the world. When European navigators like Vasco da Gama ventured beyond sight of land, they relied on astrolabes adapted from Islamic designs, cruder copies, but with the same core principles. Even Columbus carried one, though his limited understanding of its mathematics contributed to his infamous miscalculations. Today, we see their influence in unexpected places. The interlocking gears of a modern planetarium, the algorithmic star charts in our phones, even the GPS satellites overhead, all echo that same impulse to bridge sky and earth. Perhaps the most poignant testament lies in a damaged 13th century astrolabe now in Oxford's Museum of the History of Science. Its back bears a faint engraving of the Mediterranean coastline, but superimposed over it are delicate lines marking the ecliptic path of the sun. Worn smooth by centuries of fingers, it embodies a truth these scholars understood better than most, that to map the world, you must first learn to read the heavens. The Waldseemüller map didn't just depict geography, it rewrote it. Printed in 1507 by German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller, this 12-panel masterpiece was more than a collection of coastlines. It was a declaration of a new era. For the first time, the lands across the Atlantic weren't lumped together as an extension of Asia, as Ptolemy had insisted. Instead, they stood alone, a separate continent labeled with a name that would echo through history: America. The choice honored Amerigo Vespucci, the Florentine explorer whose letters described these territories not as scattered islands, but as a mundus novus, a new world. Waldseemüller's ink gave that idea permanence, etching Vespucci's name onto the very fabric of the globe. What's remarkable isn't just the name, but the audacity behind it. Previous maps had clung to classical traditions, squeezing new discoveries into old frameworks. Waldseemüller shattered those limits. His map stretched from the icy north to the tip of Patagonia, with the Pacific, still uncharted by Europeans, hinted at as a vast blank space between the Americas and Asia. The effect was revolutionary. Suddenly, the world wasn't just expanded, it was reordered. Even the map's companion book, the Cosmographiae Introductio, framed this as a cosmic revelation. a fourth part of the world has been discovered by Amerigo Vespucci. Yet the map's legacy is tangled with irony. Waldseemüller himself later doubted the name, America, omitting it from updated editions once he realized Columbus, not Vespucci, had reached the continent first. But the label stuck, spreading through atlases and letters until it was too late to undo. Every time we say America, we're invoking a cartographer's fleeting choice, proof that maps don't just reflect reality, they shape it. The Waldseemüller map's precision is equally astonishing. Despite relying on second-hand accounts, it captures the curvature of South America's coast with near-modern accuracy, suggesting access to navigational logs now lost to time. Even its errors are revealing. North America appears as a slender sliver, reflecting how little Europeans had explored inland. Japan floats oddly close to Mexico, a quirk that may have fueled dreams of an easy Pacific crossing, dreams that would later lure Magellan into his fateful voyage. Perhaps the most poignant detail lies in the map's margins. Waldseemüller included a portrait of Ptolemy on one side, gazing across at Vespucci on the other. The symbolism is unmistakable, the old world and the new, separated by centuries but bound by ink. Today, only one surviving copy of the map exists, housed in the Library of Congress, its once vibrant colors faded but its message undimmed. It reminds us that every map is an argument, a snapshot of what we think we know, and an invitation to discover how much more lies beyond the edges. Plato's tale of Atlantis wasn't just a story, it was a cartographic obsession waiting to happen. When he described an advanced island kingdom beyond the Pillars of Hercules, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night, he gave mapmakers a mystery they couldn't resist. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and you'll find scholars like Athanasius Kircher sketching Atlantis as a sprawling continent in the mid-Atlantic, complete with mountain ranges and rivers, as if he'd pulled the lost city from the depths with his quill. These weren't idle doodles, they were attempts to reconcile Plato's vivid details, circular cities, golden temples, and all with a growing body of geographic knowledge. Even as explorers charted the real Americas, the ghost of Atlantis lingered in the margins, a blank space begging to be filled. But what if some of these maps held grains of truth? Take the Santorini eruption around 1600 BCE, a cataclysm so violent it obliterated the Minoan outpost of Akrotiri and sent tsunamis crashing across the Mediterranean. Geological surveys show the island's center collapsed into the sea, leaving a crescent-shaped caldera that mirrors Plato's description of concentric rings. Could this have been the seed of the Atlantis legend? Some maps from the Ottoman era label Santorini as Kalist, an older name meaning the most beautiful, hinting at a cultural memory of its pre-eruption splendor. Others point to the Azores, where underwater scans reveal strange geometric formations on the seabed structures that, while likely natural, fueled speculation about sunken ruins. The real intrigue lies in how these theories evolve with each technological leap. In the 1970s, a Soviet oceanographic team claimed to find man-made walls off the coast of the Bahamas, sparking a flurry of maps plotting Atlantis near Bimini. Modern sonar has since debunked those walls as Beacroc, but the pattern repeats. Every time we map a new slice of the ocean floor, someone declares it the real Atlantis. Even NOAA bathymetric data gets co-opted, with enthusiasts overlaying Plato's dimensions onto underwater plateaus like the Spartel Bank near Gibraltar. Yet the most compelling maps aren't the ones that claim to solve the mystery, they're the ones that embrace its ambiguity. Medieval Arabic cartographers like al-Idrisi placed Al-Atlantis as a phantom island west of Africa, surrounded by swirling sea monsters. 18th century French atlases marked Terre de l'Atlantide with dotted lines, acknowledging it as both fiction and a placeholder for the unknown. These maps didn't just document geography, they documented desire, the human need to believe there's always one more lost world waiting to be found, and perhaps that's the real lesson. Whether Atlantis was a distorted memory of a volcanic disaster, a metaphor for societal collapse, or pure invention, its persistence on maps reveals something deeper. Every time we sketch a vanished civilization onto parchment or pixels, we're not just hunting for ruins, we're grappling with the fragility of our own world, and the hope that even the grandest cities might leave traces not just in stone, but in stories, and in the endless human urge to redraw the boundaries of the possible. The Turin Papyrus sits quietly in a museum today, its edges frayed and pigments faded, but 3,000 years ago, this fragile sheet of pressed reeds was the key to Egypt's wealth. Drawn during the reign of Ramesses IV, it charts a 15-kilometer stretch of Wadi Hammamat, a barren valley in eastern Egypt that hid veins of gold deep within its cliffs. Every line on this map served a purpose. Zigzagging paths marked caravan routes, black dots indicated wells where laborers could drink, and hieroglyphic labels named the quarries where precious stone waited to be hauled back to the Nile. This wasn't a map for explorers or philosophers. It was a spreadsheet in pictorial form, a bureaucratic tool for squeezing riches from the earth. What makes the Turin Papyrus extraordinary isn't just its age, it's its precision. Using a grid-like system of red and black lines, the map plots the valley's topography with startling accuracy. Modern surveys show its depictions of hill slopes and dry riverbeds align almost perfectly with satellite imagery. The cartographer even included a clever visual trick. The map flattens the wadi's winding course into a straight line, like unrolling a scroll of terrain, so administrators could measure distances at a glance. This level of sophistication suggests generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through scribes who understood that geography was the backbone of empire. But the real story lies in the margins. Tiny notes scribbled beside the mines reveal the human cost behind the gold. One annotation lists the names of workers who died in a rockslide. Another complains of dwindling rations. These weren't just map makers, they were foremen tracking productivity and mortality rates, their reed pens etching both geography and grievance onto the papyrus. The map's survival hints at why it mattered so much. Gold funded Egypt's armies, temples, and diplomacy. Controlling the mines meant controlling the kingdom's fate, and this fragile document was the playbook. Yet for all its practicality, the Turin Papyrus holds quieter mysteries. Why did its creator take such care to sketch the surrounding cliffs in ochre and indigo when simple symbols would suffice? Was it pride in craftsmanship or a nod to the spiritual significance of the land? In Egyptian cosmology, the eastern desert was the realm of the rising sun, a liminal space between order and chaos. Even a mind map, it seems, couldn't escape the weight of myth. Today, as we peer at its cracked surface under glass, the papyrus challenges our assumptions about ancient technology. This wasn't primitive, it was a masterpiece of resource management, a testament to how early civilizations turned landscape into ledger. And in that duality, it reminds us that every map, no matter how functional, carries the fingerprints of the culture that made it. The Turin Papyrus doesn't just show us where the gold was, it shows us what the gold was worth. Sea monsters didn't just lurk in the imaginations of medieval sailors, they thrived on the very maps meant to guide them. Take the Carta Marina, drawn in 1539 by Swedish cartographer Olaus Magnus. Its waters writhe with creatures so vivid they seem ready to leap off the parchment. A lobster-clawed whale dragging ships beneath the waves, a serpent coiled around a struggling vessel, even a mermaid breastfeeding her young while perched on a rock. These weren't random flights of fancy. Each monster served as a coded warning. The sea swine, a bristle-backed beast with jagged teeth, likely sprang from encounters with walruses, real animals whose size and tusks became grotesque through retelling. Similarly, the infamous kraken, depicted as an island-sized cephalopod, may have roots in giant squid sightings, their tentacles exaggerated into legends capable of swallowing whole fleets. What's fascinating is how these creatures evolved with geography. In northern maps, monsters embodied the perils of icy waters, whales mistaken for islands, their backs crusted with rocks and vegetation. Mediterranean charts, by contrast, featured sirens luring sailors onto reefs or multi-armed beasts symbolizing the chaos of sudden squalls. Even the monsters' placements held meaning. Blank spaces at the edges of maps where knowledge faded into rumor became stages for the most terrifying creations. The Hereford Mappa Mundi's outer rings teem with hybrid horrors, fish with dog heads, serpents breathing fire, all marking the boundary between the known and the unimaginable. Yet some of these beasts carried surprising practicality. The Ziphius, a sword-faced creature said to pierce ships' hulls, might have been inspired by real-life killer whales attacking wooden vessels. The horse whale, described in Norse logs, matches accounts of orcas ramming boats to capsize them. In an age without marine biology, these illustrations functioned as primitive field guides teaching sailors which creatures to flee, which to harpoon, and which waters to avoid altogether. The deeper truth lies in what these monsters reveal about their makers. A 15th century Venetian map shows a calm Mediterranean dotted with dolphins, while the Atlantic beyond the Strait of Gibraltar boils with leviathans. This wasn't just art, it was propaganda, discouraging rivals from challenging Venetian trade dominance. Other maps used monsters to mark rich fishing grounds or underwater hazards, turning folklore into navigational shorthand. By the Renaissance, the tone began to shift. Mercator's world maps still included sea beasts, but now they shared space with scientific notes about currents and depths. The monsters grew smaller, tucked into margins as curiosity slowly conquered fear. Yet their legacy endures. Modern satellite maps may have erased them, but we've replaced their gaps with new mysteries: dark matter, deep sea trenches, the uncharted 95% of our oceans. In that sense, every era gets the sea monsters it deserves, symbols of whatever still lies just beyond the edge of understanding. At first glance, Oron-Svene's heart-shaped map from 1531 looks like a whimsical oddity, a cartographic valentine more fit for a poet's study than a navigator's hands. But unfold its delicate symmetry, and you'll find a daring fusion of Renaissance ambition and mathematical precision. Svené, a French polymath who straddled the worlds of astronomy and art, didn't just draw a pretty projection. He wrestled the globe into a heart's curves without sacrificing geographic logic, plotting latitudes and longitudes along radiating lines that converged at the poles like the veins of a leaf. This wasn't mere decoration, it was an audacious attempt to solve the unsolvable: how to flatten a sphere without distorting its truth. What's startling is how much real geography hides within the artistry. Svené's Antarctica, labeled Terra Australis, sprawls across the map's lower edge as a vast, icy cap, a speculative landmass European sailors wouldn't officially sight for another 3 centuries. Some scholars argue this wasn't pure fantasy. Svené had access to Portuguese and Arab sailing logs hinting at southern lands, and his continent's contours eerily mirror the actual coastline beneath Antarctica's ice. Even his northern details, like the jagged indent of Scandinavia or the bulbous shape of Africa, reveal a cartographer deeply engaged with the latest reports from explorers. The heart shape then becomes a clever sleight of hand, a way to package cutting-edge knowledge in a form that delighted patrons and defied convention. Yet the map's true genius lies in its contradictions. Ptolemy knew the Earth wasn't heart-shaped. His own astronomical treatises proved it. By choosing this form, he acknowledged something profound, that maps are as much about persuasion as precision. To Renaissance rulers, a heart symbolized harmony and divine order qualities any kingdom wished to project. The projection also served practical ends. Its curves minimized distortion in the populated northern latitudes while compassing the largely unknown south, a subtle nudge to focus on the important parts of the world. In that sense, Ptolemy's heart wasn't just a shape. It was an argument, a visual manifesto that said, this is how the world ought to be seen. The legacy of this map defies easy judgment. Modern eyes might dismiss it as charmingly wrong, but its errors are precisely what make it invaluable. When Ptolemy sketched rivers flowing from Terra Australis into an imagined southern ocean, he wasn't failing science, he was documenting the limits of his era's knowledge and the courage to fill gaps with educated guesses. Later explorers from Cook to Shackleton would chase these very phantoms, proving that even mistakes can chart the course of discovery, and perhaps that's the lesson etched into the parchment's delicate veins. A map's worth isn't just in its accuracy, but in its ability to inspire, to turn the known world into a canvas for the next great leap into the unknown. Ancient maps are more than historical curiosities. They're time capsules of human curiosity, ambition, and ingenuity. From Ptolemy's grids to Polynesian stick charts, these artifacts reveal how diverse cultures made sense of their world long before satellites. Some maps hint at lost knowledge, while others remind us that exploration is as much about imagination as discovery. As we uncover their secrets, we're reminded that every era has its mysteries waiting to be decoded. What other truths might lie hidden in these ancient lines and legends? The journey is far from over, so grab your compass and let's keep exploring together. Think about the Babylonian clay tablets, where the world was a flat disk floating in cosmic waters, or the Hereford Mappa Mundi, where faith and geography intertwined so tightly they became inseparable. These weren't just attempts to chart land and sea, they were expressions of how people saw themselves in the universe. A medieval monk drawing dragons at the edge of the known world wasn't being naive. He was acknowledging the limits of human understanding, leaving room for wonder in the blank spaces. And then there are the maps that defy explanation, like the Piri Reis fragment with its phantom coastline of Antarctica, or the Bewatch Map's eerie prediction of a landmass split by a hidden sea. Were these strokes of luck or glimpses of knowledge since forgotten? The debate itself is part of the magic. These artifacts don't just show us where we've been, they invite us to question what we think we know. Consider the stick charts of the Polynesians, woven from memory and taught through song. They didn't need parchment or ink to navigate thousands of miles of open ocean. Their maps lived in the mind, a symphony of stars, waves, and wind. In contrast, the Daming Hunyi II, China's sprawling silk map, was a triumph of bureaucracy, plotting every mountain and river with imperial precision. Both approaches, though worlds apart, shared a common goal: to make the unknowable known. The beauty of these ancient maps lies in their imperfections. A misplaced island, a mythical creature, a coastline that ends abruptly, these aren't failures. They're footprints of the human spirit, marking the path from uncertainty to discovery. Every era tells a story, every blank space a challenge. When Fra Mauro dared to contradict Ptolemy, or when al-Idrisi turned the world upside down, they weren't just drawing lines. They were rewriting the rules. So what's next? With every technological advance, satellites, sonar, LiDAR, we peel back another layer of the past. Yet for all our tools, the thrill remains the same. That moment when the ink on an old map suddenly aligns with a new truth. Maybe it's a sunken city, a lost trade route, or a civilization we never knew existed. The maps are waiting, patient and silent, holding their secrets until we're ready to listen. The compass needle swings, the parchment unfolds, and the adventure continues, because the greatest map of all is the one we're still drawing together.